Hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen so you can see. Perfect. Great to see you from all over the world. My name is Jenna Bonistalli. I'm an artist and a teacher currently based in Iowa City, Iowa in the United States. My personal practice centers around installation, paper, and fiber processes, as well as ceramics. I have recently been working on large-scale weavings. Thank you to the IAPMA Conference Committee for their continued efforts to help this come to fruition. I know it's been a lot of shifting and adapting, and I'm thrilled to be invited to present. The title of my presentation is Paper and Process, Aesthetics, Materiality, and the Body. And I'll say that this will just scratch the surface of a very big idea, a tiny window into a much, much larger inquiry. The central question is about the relationship between the maker and the material and the material and the maker, considering the body and its sensory experience in and through art making. These are 3 pieces from a series I created entitled The Prairie. They are 21 embroidered plant systems in total, wax thread through Daphne paper. Conceptually, I think a great deal about time and ecology, particularly considering plants as animate, sentient beings, relationships, and ecosystems, as well as communication. If I consider plants sentient, then I must also consider paper sentient. And that's a good deal what this talk is about, considering animacy in the body of the maker, as well as animacy of the material the maker works with. These are images from an exploration of the Musai family, Abaca and banana. I fermented one batch and cooked another, some separately using combinations of leaves and stalks. A range of results came from the stalks and the leaves alone, alive, crisp, and supple. I also do a good deal of installation work, thinking about space and materiality. Here is a piece called Healing, Instrument 1. Some of the materials are kapok fiber, silk, ceramic, chamomile, calendula, and projected light. I have recently used the term choreography of materials, discussing the materials taking on a life and conversation of their own. A part of my interest in this topic comes from having been a dancer as a young person. This was a really big element of my formative creative experience. One text I have been tremendously influenced by is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She writes, "Paying attention is an act of reciprocity with the living world. Here, materials provide a mode of both translation and communication." These are a few slides from my MFA thesis exhibition, Fruit and Dreaming, including paper screens, as well as tapestry weavings, ceramic, light, and sound elements. Again, thinking about how different elements might speak with one another in both day and night. The shadow almost becomes a body. The weaving is even larger than human-sized, 17 feet long, warp by 8 feet high. It truly took a full body experience to make. It becomes its own animated person in a certain way. Everyone who has ever made a sheet of paper watches the tremendous delicacy of wet pulp as it merges on the mold, in many ways becoming a field recorder, picking up every tiny perceptible sensation. I was just working recently in the studio with short cotton after pulping a well-worn applique blanket. I cooched these sheets onto portions of the blanket itself to create relief pieces. Here's a detail of the relief transfer. The sensitivity is tremendous. What I say here about paper, I think applies to other materials, clay, fiber, drawing, painting, etc. The example of paper becomes so illustrative of the artist's physical influence and literal vibration, as there is such a dramatic state change the maker both facilitates and experiences in the moment of sheet forming, where the water drains and hydrogen bonds begin to form in front of our eyes. Our involvement in this moment is very, very active. This line of inquiry began in fall 2017 when I learned Nagashizuki style sheet forming as a true beginner. Of course, there are many factors that go into forming a sheet of washi, so much to learn about the balance of these elements. However, my primary observation was the movement itself, such a dance-like process, so tied into the rhythms of the body. I couldn't help but wonder if my body is more relaxed, connected, attuned, might these sheets improve? I put that in quotes as I came to the sense that there is much more happening than just visual markers of improvement. We are often deeply a part of many state changes, growing, cooking, beating, sheet forming, etc. I will describe my process and show some images. These are from 2017 to 2019. First, I decided to practice for the sake of practice. I cooched every sheet, no matter what, and ended up with a stack of bubbles and ripples. I just practiced and practiced. This process allowed me to focus on the movement without concern for the final product. I became interested in other ways of seeing what might affect the paper itself. Closing your eyes and listening, for example, meditating in advance, not drinking coffee beforehand, etc. These efforts continued, again, focusing on the act and art of the body rather than the quality of the final sheet. Many of these stacks I never pressed. When I did press sheets, I tried to make the quest for the quest less for the perfect sheet and more for the curiosity of how the experiment was going. Did I get into the flow? Did the process feel connected, integrated? How might the paper reflect that? The word aesthetics originally translates to relating to the senses, bearing reference to anesthesia, a highly disembodied experience. The word's association with visual beauty did not come until the mid 18th century. Formerly, it had much more coincidence with all the physical senses. Richard Schusterman defines somaesthetics as the critical study and ameliorative cultivation of how we experience and use the living body, soma, as a site of sensory appreciation, aesthesis. He proposes that the body can be recognized as our primordial instrument, the tool of all tools. In this process, I had to be okay with things not looking great, which was very difficult. If I wanted to stay in the flow, I coached every sheet. I just made a rule for myself. It kept me going. However, objectively, the sheets did improve. In the end, I made a lot of paper. Perhaps my abilities grew. My understanding of the materials definitely did. The results became an aesthetic rendering of the process. I often show this picture, which is of Lenore Tawney. I use the image again to highlight the body. Working with thread, as I often do, if the body is tense, all that results is a huge tangle. The second you release, threads unfold from each other. In Vibrant Matter, the political theorist Jane Bennett discusses a certain vital materiality that runs through and across bodies, both human and non-human. She writes, "Here is Delanda's account of the emergence of our bones. Soft tissue, gels and aerosols, muscle and nerve reigned supreme until 5,000 million years ago. At that point, some of the conglomerates of fleshy matter energy that made up life underwent a sudden mineralization, and a new material for constructing living creatures emerged, bone, making new forms of movement control possible among animals, freeing them from many constraints and literally setting them into motion to conquer every available niche in the air, in water, and on land. We are walking, talking minerals," she writes. Again, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, Bennett is suggesting a sort of reciprocity, a commonality with the non-human world. Yes, humans are very powerful actants, as she calls us. However, we are also of the earth. For me, an influential source of somatic learning has been through the Alexander technique. I came to Alexander after dealing with a dance injury and preparing for a difficult performance. Guiding principles work from a belief and trust in the inherent brilliance and animacy of the body through its natural ways of being rather than doing. In this sense, the technique explores undoing. Bruce Furtman, an Alexander teacher, writes, perhaps naturalists, conservationists, and ecologists have something to teach us about our bodies. Some deep ecologists think of the earth as a living body. I think about the body as a moving earth, living landscape, as knowing water, fluid fire. I want to acknowledge, particularly as we think about and make comparisons to land as body and body as land, that the body is oftentimes a locale of tremendous trauma, personal, social, political, historical, particularly for women and BIPOC, Native and Indigenous, LGBTQIA, and people with disabilities. Many bodies have experienced profound violations and atrocities. This topic deserves enormous space and credence, and there are many who have done tremendously valuable work, writing, and research, including a few books I will cite on the following page. Affirming this deep integration seems unbelievably important. Perception and experience are intimately filtered through people's unique bodies. Here are a few of those books. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Volatile Bodies by Elizabeth Cross, and How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. I'm going to come back to process for the last few slides. How might some of this theory apply to our work as makers? In his book, Japanese Papermaking, Tim Barrett references an expansive outlook describing the cycles by which papermakers often work. He writes, the sensitive craftsperson only helps the process along, as if just another element equal to the water or the fiber or the sun. I was thrilled to read Amy Richard's article, Breathing Through Paper, in Hand Papermaking magazine in 2018. I encourage you to read its entirety if you get a chance. I will summarize as best as possible. Amy is an artist with her studio in Gainesville, Florida, and she has a background as a science writer and educator. She saw and experienced herself the many healing aspects of papermaking. She wondered, what is this? Is this creativity or might it be something more? From her studies of freshwater ecology, she became curious about the transference of oxygen at the interface between air and water. Her background led her to knowing that there is more oxygen at this interface, and she hypothesized its presence at the threshold might provide physical benefits to the papermaker. She conducted a small informal experiment measuring oxygen saturation and pulse before and during papermaking. During both sessions, the majority of papermakers showed higher oxygen saturation readings after papermaking. None were lower, and many participants also showed lower pulse. Amy ends her piece by noting that there is much more to explore about the nature of water and its effects on the human body and mind. She writes, perhaps as one colleague points out, it is enough to acknowledge water's extraordinary contribution to that joyful sense of renewal gained with every sheet of paper, and be grateful. In many ways, Amy's project highlights an equanimity of sorts. She is suggesting not only are we actants, but the material itself is actant upon us. The water is influencing our state. Another application is the therapeutic use of the papermaking process. Peace Paper Project is a group that works with social activists, trauma therapists, and artists to turn clothing into paper, engaging and activating an emotional healing process for many individuals. Peace Paper Project will be publishing an upcoming text on this topic in 2023 with 18 contributors, including Amy Richard, entitled The Art and Art Therapy of Papermaking, Material, Methods, and Applications. It will encompass contemporary practices, media, and the value of hand papermaking in social engagement, art therapy, and personal voice. If we consider humans to be advanced material systems, then our interactions with and transformation of materials is in deep conversation with the world around us. This horizontal plane falls in step with Robin Wall Kimmerer's idea that all flourishing is mutual. In this sensibility, a certain veil is lifted. Perhaps some hierarchies might dissolve and boundaries collapse. Many thanks to those who have been part of and adjacent to these inquiries and/or contributed to conversation in developing this talk. Some of the texts I mentioned are listed here, as well as Amy Richard's website and that of Peace Paper Project. More detailed citations are listed in the transcription of this talk, which should be available by IAPMA. My contact information is listed here, as well as my website and Instagram. I would love to be in touch regarding any adjacent projects or topics. Thank you so much for your attention and listening, and I hope to meet you all in person one day. Bye.